Newsmaker Sunday with Fox 10's John Hook.
Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker Sunday. We're pleased to have back, and it's been a while, and he reminded me of that when he walked in the door today, Maricopa County Attorney Bill Montgomery, who was elected to replace Andrew Thomas in 2010, then defeated interim county attorney at the time, Rick Romley, won a full term in 2012, re-elected in 2016. Great to see you again.
Thank you, John.
Good to have you here. Thanks. Okay, let's start with the thorny issue that you've been in the news about a lot lately. This public records business, dealing with your take on what should be accessible to the media. Do you need to protect people, you know, through prejudicial evidence that could be problematic in a case? Give me your take on what you're trying to do in this area.
Sure, and it's actually very narrow. It's not the entire field of public records. We were concerned about specific evidence that's going to be presented as part of a criminal investigation and a subsequent prosecution. And the real goal behind all of that is to make sure that while we are mindful of the First Amendment rights of the press and the need to provide information to the public, there are also interests with respect to the due process rights of criminal defendants and victims in Arizona. And there are specific ethical rules that I have to follow as a prosecutor that aren't contemplated, let alone referenced in public records laws. So the letter that I sent out was more or less providing the other part of the conversation that needs to be had when we get these really tough issues where the media is...
Are we talking police body cam primarily? Is that one of the big ones?
Well, that's one of the areas that's most difficult to deal with because as soon as the media is aware that video might be available, I mean, it's a very appealing media and medium to be able to share with the public. It works a lot better, I understand, to show pictures than to have to deal with narration from text. But the thing behind that we're still struggling to come to terms with, I think, as a society, is that it can be very dramatic.
Prejudicial.
And it very well might be. You know, depicting a defendant or a victim in body camera video implicates a whole lot of other interests. And so that letter is just saying, hey, there are other things here that we need to be talking about. I certainly am not the absolute clearinghouse for every public records request in Maricopa County. And we're talking about a very narrow area of information that law enforcement and prosecutors have a shared and mutual obligation to be mindful of that shouldn't be discounted or excluded when considering public records law and requests. I don't think it's an either or, I think it's a both and it requires communication and cooperation to get to a good result each time.
Let me kind of back you up, and you're part of this piece. Matt Galka, this is tape number 1 on this whole issue about public records and the county attorney's feeling about it. Take a look.
Prosecutors are responsible for law enforcement agencies, even though they don't work for me.
Maricopa County Attorney Bill Montgomery told police departments earlier this month that public records requests during criminal investigations should go through his office. It may lead to the withholding of video or other evidence during records requests.
You know, I don't get calls from law enforcement when the media asks for a copy of a police report. We don't get those. It's understood. It's a public record. It's not evidence. What we're talking about with evidentiary issues then deals with that crossover.
Montgomery specifically cited the Philip Brailsford case where the Mesa police officer shot and killed an unarmed man in a motel hallway. Brailsford was found not guilty of murder. Only redacted body cam footage was released before the trial ended.
It was the officer/defendant's view of what happened. And our initial response to the police department was, look, this video is so inflammatory that it could heighten condemnation of the accused. That's language in the ethical rule that applies to prosecutors. I don't think we can provide this. Let's ask a judge to review it.
But legal counsel Dan Barr with the First Amendment Coalition of Arizona says this move is unprecedented.
It could be a problem if any of these police departments follow the advice of the county attorney, who again is not their attorney. The people who are responsible for carrying out the public records law are the police departments themselves.
Okay, so this balancing act of letting the public know what happened, Brailsford is a great example. I think when people saw the video, even seasoned officers were like, wow. And you have to prosecute the case. So you're saying that if departments release some of this stuff, it may harm you down the road, may harm the people involved in the case. That's your position.
Right. And so taking a look at the evidence in question and what's been requested to figure out what can we do to satisfy a public records request for evidence in a criminal investigation, at the same time maintaining the integrity of any subsequent prosecution and abiding by the due process rights of an accused and a victim. And again, this isn't either everything gets out or nothing gets out. It requires
but
that balance.
Are you then in a position of kind of being judge, jury, and executioner in deciding where the information goes?
No, not at all, John. And in fact, that process in the Brailsford case revealed what I think is a good path for us to look to in the future. And it might require legislative action too, to say that where you have those finite set of circumstances where you've got something that really is so inflammatory or the nature of the information is such that it could implicate the due process rights of a defendant or the accused, let's identify what that is. And if we can't figure out a way to be able to release it as requested, then let's ask a judge to look at it and figure it out.
So you're not saying you're the final word, because of course the news media organizations would go to court and say, hey, we think the county attorney's wrong, let's figure it out.
Yeah, in those very narrow areas. Well, it could, and so that's, in fact, in working with the attorney for Phoenix newspapers, the three things he identifies is that it all comes down to time, who's making the decision, and how much is it going to cost. And this process that I've laid out, that we've actually been working through for the last several years.
This is not a new issue.
It's not in that regard. The conversation about it certainly has picked up. But at the end of the day, if there's a disagreement between the media and law enforcement about whether or not something should be released, well, let's have a judge look at it then, because at that point, I've done everything I'm supposed to do, and we've had a court ruling, so I don't have to worry about then later on a defendant asserting a different issue.
Let me just kind of bottom line it. Is your concern that if a juror, a potential juror, is to see, say, body cam video that is really, as you put it, highly inflammatory, that juror comes in and into the process and says, I've seen that video and I think the guy's guilty?
That's always a concern.
And you can excuse that juror, of course,
right,
and try to find somebody who hasn't seen it.
Right. And in a county of over 4 million, would we be able to do that? Well, that's the case-by-case basis. But I think we're in a brave new world where social media takes information like this and makes it available in a much more exponential way than something that just shows up atop the fold of a newspaper.
Let me ask you, we're looking at body cam footage, and we can re-roll that. Body cam video in police incidents. On balance, do you think it has been helpful to get to the truth?
Yes. On balance, I agree. It also is a good tool for accountability. It's a good tool for prosecutors from an evidentiary standpoint. In that regard, it's kind of similar to those cases where we would actually have surveillance video of someone committing a crime. That's great. Those are those show and tell cases. You show the jury the video, you tell them what they need to do. But we have to be mindful that body-worn camera video, much like surveillance video, is just another piece of evidence. And it may require more evidence to put it in its proper context. Real quick, we saw the video of the Brailsford shooting, but around the same time there was another shooting in Mesa where when you watch the video, it looked like, from the angle of the camera and the angle of the individuals involved, that a suspect was walking away. Well, if the suspect was walking away, then they weren't an immediate threat. We had to look at that video and put it in the context of all the other forensic evidence and the scene diagram that we had. And it was a weird...
Was that the Kristich case?
Oh, was it? It was inside. The guy had a 3-foot metal
pipe. That was
right.
Ivan Kristich.
Yeah.
I did a piece on that.
Yeah, in the initial video, it looked like he was walking away, and it was an optical illusion with the camera lens and the way people were standing. The reality was that he was walking towards the officer, but at such an angle that it gave it that appearance.
Let me roll tape number 4. Mesa particularly has had some issues out there. Use of force questions at the very least. Here's the Brailsford shooting, but there are others. There have been a series of things. Mesa Police Chief Ramon Batista announced that he is bringing in an outside expert to review the use of force policies. He hired former Maricopa County Attorney Rick Romley to work alongside internal investigators. Good move in your view?
You know, it always helps when you've got a circumstance where the community may be uneasy about the direction the police department is going, to have outside eyes take a look. And I know that Chief Batista is doing the absolute best that he can and that he's committed to that process. So, yeah, not a bad idea to bring someone in from the outside to take a look at it. Of course, the proof for the community is going to be in any recommendations and any reforms that occur.
Do you believe that there is a training issue in some departments that's leading to shooting first and asking questions later?
I don't know if I would use that phrase. What I would say is that I think we as a community have come to expect law enforcement to respond to a 911 call, get on scene, and resolve it quickly. And that takes away the advantages of time and distance to develop a situation and figure out what the best way is, what the best tactics are to deal with a situation.
Let's roll tape number 2, the Hamilton hazing case. In the end, you felt that there was not enough there to charge criminally, correct?
That's correct.
Tell me why, because people thought that this hazing thing completely went over the top and ventured into penetration of some of the players, that this was really sexual assault.
Right, and that's the course that the investigation took as well. And what was incredibly frustrating for me as a prosecutor and disappointing for me as a community member is that individuals who had firsthand information that could have corroborated what was essentially hearsay reports didn't come forward to provide us with the information.
Why do you think that was? Was there a fear of upsetting the apple cart on the Hamilton is a powerhouse in high school football?
Yeah, I think, John, it was a misguided sense of loyalty between players and parents, and even admittedly speculating some parents not wanting to ruin their son's chances at an NCAA Division I football career.
Don't rock the boat, in other words.
Yeah, and don't put your son out there to make it difficult for another program to want to recruit him, which was completely misguided.
One final thing here. Brian Patrick Miller, number 6, tape number 6, he is the accused canal killer. Angela Brasso, Melanie Burness, I covered both of those cases when I got here. This has been notably silent. I hear he's not going to go on trial for a while. This has taken a long, long time. Why?
This is the nature of capital litigation now in America and in Arizona. If you want to hold somebody fully accountable for their crimes where there's the unjustified taking of innocent human life, then it requires a number of steps to be done. And these steps are prophylactic. They're meant to address all the issues that in the past the Ninth Circuit have used as reasons to remand cases to Arizona and require us to retry people. So now we spend a lot of time and admittedly a lot of money up front to make sure if we're going to proceed with a capital case that we're going to get to a result that will withstand subsequent review by an appellate court.
Finally, I want to thank you for allowing me to retest the evidence in the Bob Crane murder case. I came to Bill Montgomery about 2 years ago to retest that evidence in the case in hopes of finding an answer. I just want to let you get on the record because we're going to continue the show on the Bob Crane murder, the 40th anniversary this weekend. Why did you let me do it?
So, John,
highly unusual.
Well, yeah, I agreed to partner with you on that, quite frankly, because I trust you. I trusted you in taking a look at all of that information and presenting it to the community in a full and fair way, whatever it wound up showing.
Are you still glad you did it?
Yeah, I am, because there was an open question. We may not have gotten a conclusive answer, but it was a question that was able to be asked and to be reviewed. And look, science caught up to the evidence that we still had on file. And if we could have gotten to a conclusive answer, I think at the end of the day, prosecutors aren't afraid of the truth. So whatever it was is whatever it was going to be.
One more thing. If you had had that answer, and you were the county attorney at the time, the answer we got, which did not point to John Carpenter as the killer, would you have continued to pursue this guy?
Under all of the circumstances, as much as I might have wanted to, because of the family setting, I don't think we would have been able to, because it wouldn't have met our charging standard of a reasonable likelihood of conviction. And I think from my experience and reviewing cases with seasoned prosecutors, it would have been too much of a crapshoot to justify charging someone with homicide.
Bill Montgomery, our guest in the first part of Newsmaker Sunday. Thank you, Bill, for being here. When we come back, the Bob Crane murder, 40 years later, we take a look back. Coming up on Newsmaker Sunday. Welcome back to Newsmaker Sunday. 40 years since the murder of TV icon Bob Crane, the star of Hogan's Heroes, murdered in Scottsdale on June 29, 1978. The murder is fascinating on so many fronts because technically it has never been solved. Nobody went to prison for the crime, although police thought they had the right guy, Crane's good friend John Carpenter. The case is still one of the most alluring celebrity murder cases of all time, and it happened right here in our community. We take a look back at the Crane case 40 years later.
Bob Crane's blood taken at his autopsy, his fingerprints from the morgue, fingerprints of the suspected killer, John Carpenter.
This is Officer Borkenhagen from...
Endless cassette tapes of witness interviews, Crane's homemade porn tapes, photographs of his day planner, stained with his own blood, recovered from his bedside table. Personal items from a star's life, dramatically cut short. Pieces of a tantalizing case that has captured the nation's imagination for 40 years.
During my career, I've had a lot of big cases, but the Bob Crane case tops them all.
He defined TV's leading man in the 1960s and still does today in endless reruns. Frozen in time, the handsome, smooth, wisecracking Colonel Hogan.
How do I look? Fine. Don't worry. It's just a radio broadcast.
That's right.
Heard by millions of people.
Millions of people.
And the Fuhrer.
The Fuhrer.
In the summer of 1978, Bob Crane was starring in Beginner's Luck at the Windmill Dinner Theater in Scottsdale when his luck ran out in the early morning hours of June 29th. Someone bludgeoned Crane to death while he slept in his apartment. There was no struggle, no sign of forced entry. This wasn't a robbery. Someone wanted Bob Crane dead.
These are pictures of the victim laying on his right side in the bedroom.
Fox 10 uncovered this never-before-seen police video taken from inside Crane's apartment as the medical examiner shaved Crane's battered skull for a closer look at the fatal wounds.
Well, we got two blows here. There are very definitely two blows on this.
An electrical cord cut from a video camera was tied around Crane's neck. Bob Crane would have turned 50 in 2 weeks. Suspicions quickly turned to Crane's longtime pal, John Carpenter, who was hanging out with Crane in the hours before the murder. The two shared a dark obsession, videotaping their sexual conquests with countless women.
This all-American image of him, of my dad as Colonel Hogan, has the dark side. Colonel Hogan isn't who we thought he was, and it became kind of a hobby that went too far. I think their friendship really revolved around electronics and women.
Carpenter became the lead suspect when blood was discovered in his rental car one day after the murder, blood matching Bob Crane's rare blood type. Police theorized Carpenter killed Crane because Crane was trying to sever their relationship.
Towards the end of my dad's life, he was definitely pulling away from John Carpenter. John Carpenter's a pain in the ass. I'm making changes.
Retired Scottsdale detective Dennis Borkenhagen interviewed Carpenter.
What were your impressions of the guy?
He was very stoic.
You implied and directly told me that I had had direct contact with Bob Crane's death.
Yes. In fact, we'll get to that.
First time I talked to him, I knew we were dealing with a guy that was going to be hard to crack.
Did you feel he was lying to you?
Oh, yeah.
No doubt.
Yeah.
You felt he was deceptive?
Yeah.
Detectives tried to get Carpenter to confess.
We're trying to talk to you about the murder of Bob Crane.
This I understand.
In Scottsdale.
This I understand.
What do you think about that?
I think it's a great, but when you sit across from me and accuse me of killing my best friend, one of my best friends.
Well, I'm still thinking that you did.
All right, then fine. Then
In fact, I think I would be able to probably prove that you did.
Then fine. Then I'm not going to say another word. I'm sorry.
Well, I don't know if you should say another word or not.
Then I'm sorry.
What do you mean you're sorry? You're sorry you killed him? Are you? Or do you think he deserved it? Why don't you tell me about that? Let's get right to it. I think you're about ready to tell us about it, and let's get right with it. What happened in Scottsdale, Arizona to cause you to kill Bob Crane?
Carpenter never cracked. 16 years passed before he was eventually put on trial for Bob Crane's murder. In 1990, a new county attorney, Rick Romley, reopened the Crane murder case as investigators started from scratch.
We re-interviewed everybody involved in this case. We tracked down each and every person. We just basically eliminated everybody else on the planet.
Once again, one name, one suspect emerged.
All roads lead to John Carpenter.
Absolutely.
No doubt.
No doubt.
It had been 16 years since the murder, and investigators still lacked hard physical evidence tying Carpenter to the killing. DNA tests on the blood found in Carpenter's car were inconclusive. There was no way to prove the blood came from Bob Crane.
How big of a deal was that to you guys?
That was a big deal.
Michael Lake was the jury foreman.
If we had DNA from that car, he would have been found guilty. I'm 100% positive.
Without that crucial evidence, the jury found John Carpenter
not guilty of murder in the first degree. Signed, foreperson, Michael E. Lake.
But they wanted the DNA. I mean, that's, in the end, we didn't have sufficient evidence to be able to get a guilty verdict.
A cloud of suspicion haunted Carpenter until his death 4 years later. To this day, police insist they identified the killer. They just couldn't prove it.
There is no doubt in your mind that John Carpenter killed Bob Crane.
None whatsoever.
Carpenter did this.
He's the guy.
No doubt.
No doubt.
100%.
100%.
This is all that remains of the most notorious murder in Arizona history. The physical evidence from the Bob Crane murder case packed into these 11 boxes.
But there remain plenty of doubters as to whether authorities had the right guy in John Carpenter. When we come back, our look at the case as we reopen the physical evidence in the Bob Crane murder, retesting the DNA evidence to see if it would say once and for all who was his killer. That when we return on Newsmaker Sunday. Welcome back to Newsmaker Sunday. In 2016, I was granted unprecedented access to the Bob Crane physical evidence, the murder of the Hogan's Heroes star that happened in 1978. John Carpenter went on trial for the killing in 1994. But many felt police had the wrong guy, that Crane's killer was still out there. We took a look at that evidence and retested it. My hope is that if we could prove that the blood found in John Carpenter's rental car matched Bob Crane using modern DNA science, we could perhaps end this case once and for all and close the book on the Bob Crane murder.
These are the original sections of the passenger door from John Carpenter's rental car. The missing pieces are where the blood was found. The cutouts were tested 4 separate times in the late 1980s and early 90s for DNA.
None of them were able to conclusively say that it was Bob Crane's blood.
The cutouts, stored for years in sealed vials, are what we retested in 2016 at Bodie Cellmark Forensics in Lorton, Virginia, the same lab that performed DNA tests in several high-profile murder cases like O.J. Simpson, JonBenet Ramsey, and Bob Crane. Our tests produced a shocking result. 2 profiles emerged, but none from Bob Crane, only adding to the mystery. Did police focus on the wrong suspect?
The Bob Crane murder 40 years later. It is chronicled in my book, Who Killed Bob Crane? The Final Close-Up. It is a deep dive into one of the most fascinating celebrity murder cases of all time. Thanks for joining us on Newsmaker Sunday. We'll see you next week.